My family. Told the waiter to ignore me at dinner. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody mentions that sometimes it can drown you. I learned this lesson not in a dramatic moment of crisis, but sitting in an upscale restaurant on a Tuesday evening, watching a waiter pretend I didn't exist because my own family had asked him to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand that night, you need to understand the decades that led up to it. The slow, steady erosion of my place in my family until I became something less than human to them. A ghost haunting their dinner table, a shadow they'd grown so accustomed to ignoring that they eventually forgot I cast one at all. I was the middle child in a family of 5. Mom, Dad, my older sister Claire, myself, and my younger brother Marcus. Classic middle child syndrome, people would say with knowing smiles when I tried to explain how it felt to grow up invisible in my own home. But it wasn't that simple. Middle children are supposed to be peacemakers, attention seekers, rebels trying to carve out their own identity. I was just forgotten. My earliest memory is of my 5th birthday party. I remember the excitement building for weeks. Mom had promised a cake shaped like a dinosaur, my favorite at the time. I told everyone at preschool about it, drew pictures of the party I imagined, counted down the days on our kitchen calendar with the enthusiasm only a child can muster. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to the smell of vanilla and sugar drifting from the kitchen. Mom was already up, which wasn't unusual, but when I padded downstairs in my dinosaur pajamas, I found her decorating a beautiful pink princess cake. Rose-colored frosting swirled in perfect spirals, plastic figurines arranged like they were attending a royal ball. "Mom," I said, tugging at her apron, "where's my dinosaur cake?" She looked down at me with the distracted expression I would come to know so well. "What, honey?" "My dinosaur cake, for my birthday." For a moment, confusion flickered across her face, and then I saw it. That awful moment of realization. She had forgotten. Completely, utterly forgotten that today was my birthday, not Claire's party that was still 2 weeks away. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice bright with forced cheer. "This cake is so much prettier than a silly old dinosaur, don't you think? Pink is such a nice color." I stood there in my dinosaur pajamas, staring at a princess cake, understanding for the first time that my mother had literally forgotten I existed. Not my preferences, not my request me, entirely. The party that afternoon was a strange, surreal affair. A handful of my friends came over, invited by Mom in a frantic morning of phone calls after she realized her mistake. They sang "Happy Birthday" to me while we all stared at a cake that couldn't have been more wrong if it had been for someone else entirely. Which, in a way, it was. "Make a wish," Mom said, holding up the camera. I closed my eyes and wished to be remembered. It was a wish I would make on every birthday for the next 15 years. Claire, who was 7 and old enough to understand what had happened, tried to be helpful. "I like the princess cake," she announced loudly. "It's prettier than dinosaurs anyway." Ox. But Marcus, only 3 and brutally honest in the way small children can be, summed up the situation perfectly. Why does his cake look like girl cake? The adults laughed. Oh, how they laughed at the innocent observation that cut straight to the heart of my humiliation. Even at 5 years old, I understood that their laughter wasn't kind. It was the laughter of people who found my disappointment amusing rather than tragic. That night, after everyone had gone home and the princess cake sat mostly uneaten on our kitchen counter, Dad found me in my room. "Hey, buddy," he said, sitting on my bed. "I'm sorry about the cake mix-up." I looked up at him hopefully. Maybe he understood. Maybe he would make it right somehow. "But you know," he continued, "the important thing is that we were all together. Family is what matters, not cake, right?" I nodded because what else could I do? But even at 5, I knew that if it had been Claire's birthday and she'd received a dinosaur cake instead of a princess one, There would have been tears and phone calls and a frantic trip to the bakery to make it right. The difference wasn't the mistake itself. It was how acceptable everyone found it when the mistake was made at my expense. This became the template for my childhood. Not malicious neglect, not deliberate cruelty, just a consistent pattern of my needs and wants being treated as optional. When Claire wanted piano lessons, she got them immediately. When I asked for the same thing 2 years later, we suddenly couldn't afford music lessons. When Marcus decided he wanted to play soccer, Dad spent weekends driving him to games and cheering from the sidelines. When I joined the school debate team, no one ever asked about my competitions or came to watch me compete. The irony is that I was probably the easiest child to ignore. Claire was dramatic and demanding, requiring constant attention and validation. Marcus was charming and mischievous, the baby of the family who could get away with anything with a smile. I was quiet, self-contained, good at entertaining myself. I read books, played alone in my room, got good grades without being asked. I suppose my parents figured I didn't need as much attention as the other two. What they didn't realize was that needing attention and deserving it are two different things. I learned to accommodate everyone else's needs before my own. When we went out to dinner, I automatically ordered last and chose something inexpensive. When we planned family vacations, I never voiced preferences because I knew they wouldn't be considered anyway. When we watched movies together, I accepted whatever everyone else wanted to see. I became an expert at reading the room, at sensing what everyone else needed, at making myself as small and undemanding as possible. I thought this was being considerate. I thought this was being mature. What I was actually doing was teaching my family that I didn't matter. In high school, I made honor roll every semester for 4 years. The certificates came in the mail, and Mom would stick them on the refrigerator with the grocery lists and Marcus's crayon drawings, as if they were all equally noteworthy. When Claire made the cheerleading squad, there was a celebration dinner. When I was elected president of the Model United Nations Club, it rated a "That's nice, honey," before the conversation moved on to more interesting topics. I applied for college scholarships and financial aid entirely on my own, sitting at our computer late at night when everyone else was asleep. I researched schools, wrote essays, filled out forms. When I got accepted to my first choice university with a partial scholarship, I announced it at dinner with proud excitement. "That's wonderful," Mom said, passing the mashed potatoes. "Claire, did you remember to turn in your history project?" And just like that, my achievement was yesterday's news, forgotten before the dinner plates were cleared. College offered a reprieve. For 4 years, I lived among people who didn't have preconceived notions about my place in their lives. I had friends who sought out my opinions, professors who valued my contributions, classmates who knew me as something other than Claire's little brother or Marcus's older brother. I discovered that I was funny, insightful, worth listening to. I had thoughts and ideas that other people found interesting. But every time I went home for holidays or breaks, I slipped back into the old role as easily as putting on worn clothes. At the family dinner table, I became invisible again. My stories about college life were politely acknowledged before the conversation turned to Claire's latest drama or Marcus's sports achievements. My opinions were dismissed or ignored entirely. I was back to being the supporting character in everyone else's story. After graduation, I moved across the country for work, putting 3 time zones between myself and my family. It was easier to love them from a distance, easier to maintain the fiction that we were close when our interactions were limited to holiday phone calls and occasional visits. I built a life for myself. I had a career I was proud of, friends who valued me, relationships with people who saw me as a whole person rather than an afterthought. I bought my own house, learned to cook for myself, traveled to places I wanted to see. For long stretches of time, I forgot about feeling invisible. I forgot about princess cakes and dismissive conversations and the particular ache of being overlooked by the people who were supposed to love you most. But family has a way of pulling you back into old patterns, especially when you're not expecting it. The call came on a Thursday evening in March. I was making dinner, something simple but satisfying. Pasta with homemade sauce, a salad with vegetables from the farmer's market, a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving for no particular reason. The phone rang just as I was sitting down to eat. "David?" Mom's voice was bright and cheerful, the tone she used when she wanted something. "How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good, Mom. Just sitting down to dinner. How are you?" "We're all wonderful. Listen, I'm calling because we have some exciting news to share." I waited, twirling pasta around my fork. Exciting news in my family usually meant Claire had gotten engaged again, or Marcus had gotten a promotion, or someone had bought a new car. It was rarely exciting news that involved me. "Claire and Marcus are both going to be in town next month," Mom continued, "and we thought it would be wonderful to have a family dinner. All of us together for once. It's been so long since we've all been in the same place at the same time." This was true. The last time we'd all been together was Christmas 2 years ago, and that had been a brief, hectic affair with too much food and too many forced conversations about people I barely remembered. "That sounds nice," I said carefully. "What's the occasion?" "Does there need to be an occasion to spend time with family?" Mom laughed. "But actually, your father got a promotion at work. He's making partner at the firm. We thought we'd celebrate properly this time." Ah, there it was. Dad's promotion was exciting news worth celebrating. We were all going to gather to honor his achievement, to show our support and pride. It was a worthy reason for a family reunion, the kind of milestone that demanded acknowledgement. "That's great news," I said, and I meant it. Dad had worked hard his entire career. He deserved recognition and celebration. Congratulations to him. "So you'll come?" It wasn't really a question. In my family, these gatherings weren't optional. You showed up, you played your role, you participated in the collective celebration of whatever was being celebrated. Your own feelings about it were irrelevant. "Of course," I said. "When and where?" "Saturday the 15th. We have reservations at Romano's. You remember that Italian place on 5th Street? The one with the lovely private dining room?" I did remember Romano's. It was expensive and elegant, the kind of place my family went for special occasions. The kind of place where they celebrated achievements that mattered to them. I had never been taken there for anything related to my own life, but I'd been there plenty of times to applaud everyone else's successes. "Sounds perfect," I said. "I'll book a flight." "Wonderful. Oh, David, it's going to be so nice to have everyone together again. Just like old times." Just like old times. I hung up the phone and stared at my dinner, suddenly less hungry than I'd been a few minutes earlier. Just like old times meant I would show up, smile, ask interested questions about everyone else's lives, and listen to conversations that didn't include me. I would be the audience for everyone else's stories, the supporting cast member who made everyone else shine brighter by comparison. But this time would be different, I told myself. This time I would make an effort to be present, to engage, to claim my place at the family table. I was 32 years old, successful in my own right, with stories of my own worth telling. Maybe my family would finally see me as an adult, as a person with a life and opinions that mattered. Maybe this time I would finally be visible. The 2 weeks leading up to the dinner felt like preparing for a performance. I thought about what I would wear, something nice but not too formal, expensive enough to show I was doing well, but not so expensive that it would seem like I was showing off. I practiced conversations in my head, rehearsing stories about my work, my travels, my life. I wanted to be ready to contribute meaningfully to whatever discussions arose. I even bought a gift for Dad, a nice bottle of whiskey from a distillery I'd visited on a business trip. Something thoughtful but not overly sentimental. I wanted him to know I was proud of his achievement, that I understood the significance of making partner at a prestigious firm. The flight to my hometown felt shorter than usual, probably because I was distracted by my own anticipation. I had convinced myself that this dinner would be a turning point, a chance to reconnect with my family as an adult, rather than the forgotten middle child I'd been growing up. Maybe we would finally have the kind of relationship I'd always wanted, one built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. I checked into my hotel and spent Friday evening walking around the neighborhood where I'd grown up, surprised by how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. The house where we'd lived looked smaller than I remembered. The yard where I'd played alone while Claire and Marcus played together with friends seeming almost cramped. The elementary school where I'd learned to be invisible was still there, though it had been renovated and expanded since my time there. It struck me that this place held most of my memories of feeling overlooked and forgotten, but it also held the memories of who I'd been before I learned to make myself small. That little boy who had wanted a dinosaur cake and believed he deserved one. Maybe it was time to remember him. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp spring weather that made everything seem possible. I dressed carefully in a dark blue suit that fit well and made me look professional and confident. I styled my hair, chose a nice watch, made sure my shoes were polished. I wanted to look like the successful person I'd become, wanted my family to see that I'd grown into someone worth paying attention to. Romano's hadn't changed much in the years since I'd been there. The same warm lighting, the same elegant decor, the same soft jazz playing in the background. The hostess led me through the main dining room to the private room Mom had reserved, and I could hear familiar voices and laughter before I even reached the door. They were already there, all of them, clustered around a table set for 5. Mom in a dress I'd seen her wear to other special occasions. Dad in his best suit looking proud and relaxed. Claire with her hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless. Marcus in business casual that somehow looked more expensive than my carefully chosen outfit. They looked up as I entered, and for a moment I felt the same flutter of hope I'd experienced as a child when I thought this time might be different. "David," Mom exclaimed, rising to hug me. "You look wonderful. Doesn't he look wonderful, everyone?" The chorus of agreement was warm and genuine, and I felt myself relaxing slightly. Maybe this really would be different. Maybe the years of distance had given us all perspective, had allowed us to see each other more clearly. "Congratulations, Dad," I said, producing the whiskey from my bag. "This is from a distillery in Kentucky that I visited last year. I thought you might enjoy it." Dad accepted the gift with what seemed like genuine pleasure, examining the label and nodding approvingly. "This looks fantastic, son. Thank you." "Son?" The word hit me with unexpected warmth. When was the last time he'd called me that? We settled around the table, and for the first few minutes, everything felt normal. Better than normal, actually. Claire asked about my flight. Marcus wanted to know about my work. Mom fussed over everyone in the way that made her feel needed and important. Dad looked relaxed and happy, basking in the celebration of his achievement. I found myself talking about my recent promotion to senior manager, about the project I'd been leading, about the recognition I'd received from our corporate office. For once, people seemed to be listening, asking follow-up questions, showing genuine interest in what I was saying. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," Claire said. "Are you enjoying the new role?" "I really am," I said, probably with more enthusiasm than the question warranted. "It's challenging, but I feel like I'm finally getting to use all my skills, you know? And the team I'm managing is incredible, so talented and motivated." "That's wonderful," Mom said. "You always were good with people, even as a child." Was I? I couldn't remember anyone noticing that about me before, but maybe they had been paying more attention than I'd realized. Maybe my perceptions of my childhood were colored by my own insecurities rather than reality. We ordered drinks wine for Mom and Claire, beer for Marcus and Dad, sparkling water for me since I was driving back to the hotel. The conversation flowed easily, covering work and travel and mutual friends, everyone contributing and everyone listening. I started to think that maybe I'd been wrong about my place in this family. Maybe the distance had been good for all of us, had allowed us to appreciate each other in ways we hadn't before. Dad raised his glass when the drinks arrived. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Making partner has been a goal of mine for so long, and having my family here to celebrate makes it even more meaningful." We clinked glasses, and I felt a genuine warmth in my chest. This was what I'd always wanted, to be part of something, to be included in the important moments, to matter to the people who mattered most to me. "So," Marcus said, settling back in his chair with his beer, "should we look at the menu? I'm starving." We opened our menus, and I found myself genuinely excited about the food. Romano's had always had excellent Italian cuisine, and I was looking forward to a good meal with my family. Maybe we'd order wine with dinner. Maybe we'd linger over dessert. Maybe we'd have the kind of long, leisurely evening that would create memories worth keeping. The waiter approached our table with the confident stride of someone who'd been doing this job for years. He was probably in his 40s, professionally dressed, with the kind of pleasant demeanor that came from dealing with family celebrations and business dinners on a regular basis. "Good evening," he said, producing a pad from his apron pocket. "My name is James, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Have you had a chance to look at the menu?" "We have," Dad said. "I think we're ready to order." James nodded and turned to Claire first, pen poised over his pad. "What can I get for you this evening?" Claire ordered the salmon with a side salad, dressing on the side, no croutons. She had always been particular about her food, conscious of calories and appearance in a way that seemed exhausting to me, but had served her well in her career in public relations. "Excellent choice," James said, writing down her order before turning to Marcus. "And for you, sir?" Marcus chose the ribeye, medium rare, with the loaded mashed potatoes and steamed broccoli. He'd always had a good metabolism and an appetite to match, able to eat whatever he wanted without consequence. "Perfect," James said, then turned to Mom. "Ma'am?" Mom decided on the chicken marsala with a side of pasta and the house salad. She ordered the way she did everything decisively, but with just enough uncertainty to invite input from others. "Does that sound good? The chicken marsala?" "It's one of our most popular dishes," James assured her, scribbling on his pad before turning to Dad. "And for you, sir?" Dad ordered the veal parmesan with a side of garlic bread and the Caesar salad. He spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to, someone whose decisions carried weight both in the courtroom and at the dinner table. Then James turned to me. I had been looking forward to this moment, had already decided what I wanted, the osso buco, which I'd never tried but had always wanted to order at an Italian restaurant. It seemed like the kind of dish that would spark conversation, that would give me something interesting to talk about during dinner. But before I could speak, before I could even open my mouth, Mom leaned toward James with a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow loud enough for the entire table to hear. "You don't need to worry about him," she said, gesturing toward me with a casual wave of her hand. "Just ignore him. He's not really hungry anyway." Time seemed to freeze. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence, impossible to ignore or take back. James looked confused, glancing between Mom and me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "I'm sorry?" he said, clearly not sure he'd heard correctly. "David," Dad said, not looking at me but addressing the waiter. "He doesn't need anything. Don't worry about taking his order." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not the casual dismissal, though, that was bad enough, but the way they said it as if I weren't sitting right there, as if I couldn't hear them, as if I were a piece of furniture they were instructing the waiter to dust around. But James looked at me directly for the first time, and I saw confusion and discomfort in his eyes. "Sir, would you like to order something?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The shock of what had just happened was too overwhelming, too surreal to process. My own parents had just told a stranger to ignore me, to pretend I didn't exist, to treat me like I wasn't worth acknowledging. I started, but Claire cut me off. "He's not feeling well," she said brightly, as if she were being helpful. "Probably better if he doesn't eat anything heavy. You understand?" James nodded slowly, though he still looked uncomfortable. "Of course, I'll put in the other orders then." He walked away, leaving us in silence. I stared at my family. My mother, who had told a stranger to ignore me. My father, who had confirmed that I didn't need anything. My sister, who had provided a lie to justify my exclusion. My brother, who sat quietly, as if nothing unusual had happened. "What just happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Mom said, reaching for her wine glass as if everything were perfectly normal. "You told the waiter to ignore me." "Don't be so dramatic, David," Dad said. "We're celebrating tonight. Let's not make this about you. Let's not make this about me." The phrase echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my consciousness like a ball thrown too hard in a small room. We were sitting in a restaurant where I had been told I didn't exist, where my own family had instructed a stranger to pretend I wasn't there, and my father was telling me not to make it about me. "I'm not trying to make anything about me," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I just wanted to order dinner." "You can have some of my bread when it comes," Marcus offered, as if sharing carbohydrates would somehow make up for being erased from existence. I looked around the table at these people. These people I had loved my entire life, had traveled across the country to celebrate with, had hoped would finally see me as worthy of their attention. They were all looking at me with expressions ranging from mild annoyance to puzzled concern, as if I were being unreasonable for wanting to order food at a restaurant. Why? I asked. Why what? Claire said. Why don't I get to order? Why doesn't my opinion matter? Why am I here if you're just going to pretend I don't exist? The questions came out in a rush, 32 years of suppressed confusion and hurt, spilling over in 3 simple inquiries. I had never asked these questions directly before, had never demanded an explanation for my treatment, had never confronted them with the reality of how they made me feel. Mom sighed, the sound of someone dealing with a difficult child. David, you're being silly. Of course you can order something if you want. We just thought... You just thought what? We thought you might want to keep things simple, Dad said. This is my night, remember? My celebration. We don't need to make it complicated. There it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. My participation would complicate his celebration. My presence, my needs, my basic humanity were inconveniences to be managed rather than valued parts of the family dynamic. James returned with bread and olive oil, setting them in the center of the table with careful precision. He avoided eye contact with me entirely, having accepted my family's instruction to treat me as invisible. I watched him arrange the plates and napkins, wondering what he thought about a family that would ask him to ignore one of their own members. Actually, I said, my voice stronger now, I would like to order something. James looked up, startled, as if furniture had suddenly started talking. David, Mom said in a warning tone. No, I said, standing up from my chair. The action felt significant, like crossing a line I hadn't known existed until this moment. No, I want to order something. I want ossobuco with the risotto and a side of the roasted vegetables, and I want a glass of the Chianti Classico. James looked around the table uncertainly, clearly out of his depth in what had become a family drama. Should I? Do you want me to put that order in? Yes, I said firmly. Please put that order in. David, sit down, Dad said, his voice carrying the authority he used in courtrooms. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? The laugh that came out of me was sharp and bitter. I'm making a scene by ordering dinner at a restaurant, by existing in the same space as my family, by expecting to be treated like a human being. You're overreacting, Claire said. We were just trying to what? To help? To be considerate? I looked around the table at their faces, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Do you have any idea what it's like to be treated like you don't matter? Do you know what it's like to grow up feeling invisible in your own family? That's not fair, Mom said, her eyes filling with tears. We've always loved you. We've always been proud of you. Have you? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Because I can't remember a single time in my entire life when you've made me feel like I mattered as much as Claire or Marcus. I can't remember a single achievement of mine that you've celebrated the way you celebrate theirs. I can't remember ever feeling like my opinions or feelings or needs were as important as anyone else's at this table. That's not true, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you asked about my life without immediately changing the subject to something more interesting? When was the last time you celebrated something I accomplished or supported something I cared about? The silence stretched between us, filled with the soft jazz from the restaurant sound system and the distant murmur of other diners enjoying their meals. None of them answered my questions because none of them could. David, Dad said finally, his voice gentler now. We didn't know you felt this way. You didn't know because you never asked. You didn't know because you were never paying attention. You didn't know because it was easier to assume I was fine than to consider that maybe I needed the same love and attention and recognition that you gave so freely to Claire and Marcus. I reached into my wallet and pulled out enough cash to cover my theoretical meal and a generous tip for James, who was still standing nearby looking like he wished he were anywhere else. This should cover whatever I ordered, I said, placing the money on the table. And a tip for dealing with our family's dysfunction. David, please, Mom said, reaching for my hand. Don't leave like this. We can work this out. I looked at her hand on mine, at the familiar wedding ring she'd worn for 35 years, at the age spots and lines that marked the passage of time. This was the hand that had made princess cake instead of dinosaur cake, that had posted my honor roll certificates next to grocery lists, that had waved dismissively at James while instructing him to ignore me. "Can we?" I asked. "Can we work this out? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've all decided that this is exactly how you want our family to function. You've had 32 years to notice that you were treating me like I don't matter, and instead of changing, you've just gotten more comfortable with it." I gently moved my hand away from hers and picked up my suit jacket from the back of my chair. "Where are you going?" Claire asked. "I'm going to find a restaurant where I'm allowed to order dinner," I said, "where the staff doesn't receive instructions to pretend I don't exist, where my money is considered as good as anyone else's." "This is ridiculous," Dad said, his patience finally wearing thin. "You're acting like a child." "No," I said, putting on my jacket with deliberate care. "A child would throw a tantrum and demand attention. A child would make a scene and cause a disruption. I'm acting like an adult who has finally realized that he deserves to be treated with basic respect and dignity." I looked around the table one more time, at these people I had loved despite everything, despite years of feeling invisible and unimportant and forgotten. They were staring at me like they'd never seen me before, as if the quiet, accommodating David they knew had been replaced by someone they didn't recognize. Maybe he had been. "I hope you enjoy your celebration dinner," I said. "Dad, congratulations again on making partner. You've worked hard for it, and you deserve the recognition." I started to walk away, but Mom's voice stopped me. "David, you can't just leave. We're family." I turned back to face her. This woman who had given birth to me and raised me, and never quite figured out how to see me. "Family doesn't tell waiters to ignore each other," I said quietly. "Family doesn't dismiss each other's needs as inconvenient. Family doesn't make each other feel invisible." "We never meant to make you feel invisible," she said, and I believed that she meant it. "I know you didn't mean to," I replied, "but meaning to and doing it are two different things. And the fact that you didn't mean to makes it worse, not better. It means that ignoring me, dismissing me, treating me like I don't matter, it all came so naturally to you that you didn't even realize you were doing it." James had retreated to a respectful distance, but I could see him hovering near the wall, probably wondering if he should call a manager or just wait for the family drama to resolve itself. I felt sorry for him, caught in the middle of something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with 30 years of dysfunction. "I'm going to head out," I said to the table. "Try to enjoy the rest of your evening." This time, no one tried to stop me. I walked through the restaurant with as much dignity as I could muster, past tables full of families and couples and friends sharing meals and conversation. I wondered if any of them had ever been told they didn't deserve dinner, if any of them had ever been instructed to remain invisible while everyone around them celebrated. The cool evening air felt good on my face as I stepped outside. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear or sadness, but from the adrenaline that comes from finally standing up for yourself after decades of staying silent. I felt hollowed out and energized at the same time, like a house after renovation where the walls have been torn down to make room for something better. I walked to my rental car and sat behind the wheel for several minutes, not starting the engine, just breathing in the silence and trying to process what had just happened. I had confronted my family. I had refused to accept unacceptable treatment. I had walked away from people who treated me like I didn't matter. It should have felt triumphant, but mostly it just felt sad. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Marcus. That was intense. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I will be." Another message, this time from Claire. "You really hurt Mom and Dad. That wasn't fair." I read it twice before deleting it without responding. The fact that she thought I had been unfair to them, rather than the other way around, told me everything I needed to know about how long it would take them to understand what had really happened tonight. I started the car and drove through the familiar streets of my hometown, past the places that held memories of feeling small and invisible and unimportant. But something had changed. I wasn't that ignored little boy anymore. I wasn't the forgotten middle child or the accommodating teenager or the distant adult son who showed up dutifully for celebrations that weren't about him. I was someone who had finally learned to value himself enough to demand that others value him too. I found a small bistro downtown that I'd never noticed before, probably because I'd never been in town long enough to explore on my own. It was warm and cozy, with mismatched chairs and local artwork on the walls and the kind of comfortable atmosphere that invited lingering. "Table for one?" the hostess asked with a welcoming smile. "Yes, please." She led me to a small table by the window and handed me a menu. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" "I'd like a glass of red wine," I said. "Whatever you recommend." "Our house Merlot is excellent," she said. "I'll be right back with that." I opened the menu and studied the options, realizing that this was the first time in my life I'd eaten dinner alone in my hometown. I'd always been with family, always been part of a group, always been the supporting character in someone else's story. Tonight, I was writing my own. When the server came to take my order, a different person from the hostess, a young woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile, I chose the braised short ribs with polenta and roasted root vegetables. It wasn't what I'd planned to order at Romano's, but it sounded perfect for this moment, for this new version of myself who was learning to make choices based on what he wanted rather than what would cause the least disruption. "Excellent choice," she said, writing down my order without any hesitation or confusion. "That should be out in about 20 minutes. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. As I sat there alone, sipping wine and watching people walk past the window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the hollow quiet that comes from making yourself small and undemanding, but genuine peace that comes from finally standing up for yourself. My phone buzzed several more times during dinner messages from Mom, Dad, and Claire that I didn't read. I turned it face down on the table and focused on my meal, which was extraordinary. The short ribs fell apart at the touch of my fork. The polenta was creamy and rich. The vegetables were perfectly roasted. It was exactly what I had wanted, chosen without compromise or consideration for anyone else's preferences. Halfway through my meal, an elderly woman at the table next to mine leaned over slightly. "Excuse me," she said. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you look like someone who's had a good day." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth, and considered her observation. "You know what? I think I have." She smiled. "It shows. There's something peaceful about you. Content. Content. When was the last time someone had described me that way? When was the last time I'd felt that way?" "Thank you," I said. "That's very kind of you to say." "My late husband used to tell me that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself," she said. "Took me 60 years to understand what he meant." I nodded, thinking about the 32 years it had taken me to learn the same lesson. After dinner, I walked back to my hotel, taking the long way through downtown. The streets were quiet but not empty, filled with the gentle energy of a Saturday night in a small city. I passed Romano's on my way, noticing that the lights were still on in the private dining room where my family was presumably still celebrating Dad's promotion. I felt a pang of sadness thinking about them continuing the evening without me. But it wasn't the desperate, aching sadness of being excluded. It was the bittersweet sadness of recognizing that sometimes loving people means accepting that they can't or won't love you the way you need to be loved. Back in my hotel room, I finally read the messages that had accumulated on my phone. "Mom, David, please come back. We can talk about this." Dad, "Son, I think you misunderstood what happened tonight. Let's discuss this rationally." Claire, "You embarrassed all of us. Mom is crying. I hope you're happy." I read them twice, then put my phone away without responding. There would be time for conversations later, if any of them were genuinely interested in understanding rather than simply returning to the status quo. But tonight, I needed to process what had happened, to understand what it meant for my relationship with my family going forward. I sat by the window looking out at the city where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to make myself invisible, where I'd spent decades hoping to be seen by people who had forgotten how to look. Tomorrow, I would fly back to my real life, to the friends and colleagues and community where I was valued and heard and respected. But something fundamental had shifted tonight. I had finally learned to see myself clearly, and that changed everything. The next morning, I changed my flight to leave earlier than planned. Not because I was running away, but because I had said what needed to be said and done what needed to be done. There was no point in prolonging the discomfort for anyone involved. As I was checking out of the hotel, the desk clerk asked if I had enjoyed my stay. "I did," I said, and realized I meant it. It was exactly what I needed. At the airport, waiting for my boarding call, I thought about the email I would write to my family when I got home. Not angry or accusatory, but clear about what had happened and what needed to change if we were going to have any kind of relationship going forward. I thought about the conversation I would have with my therapist, about the work we would do to unpack 30 years of conditioning and to build new patterns of thinking about my own worth. I thought about the dinner I would make for myself that evening, chosen entirely based on what I wanted to eat, prepared in my own kitchen where no one would tell servers to ignore me. Most of all, I thought about the moment when James the waiter had looked at me with confusion and concern, when a complete stranger had shown more consideration for my humanity than my own family had. In that moment, I had seen myself through his eyes, not as the invisible middle child or the accommodating brother or the forgotten son, but as a person who deserved basic respect and dignity. It had taken 32 years, but I had finally learned to see what he saw. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Dad. Not Mom, which surprised me, since she usually handled family communications. His voice was careful, formal, the tone he used when he was navigating difficult territory. "David, I've been thinking about what happened at dinner," he said. "About what you said. Okay. I want you to know that your mother and I never intended to make you feel invisible. We love you, and we're proud of you." "I know you didn't intend it," I said. "But intention and impact are different things." There was a long pause. "You're right," he said finally. "We did treat you differently. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because you were so self-sufficient, so easy. Claire and Marcus always demanded more attention, and we just got used to focusing on them." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was acknowledgement, which was more than I'd expected. "I need you to understand something, Dad," I said. "I'm not going to go back to the way things were. I'm not going to accept being treated like my presence is optional or my needs are inconvenient. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be different." "What does that mean?" "It means when we have family dinners, I get to order my own food like everyone else. It means my achievements get celebrated the same way Claire's and Marcus's do. It means my opinions matter and my feelings are valid. It means I stop being the family member everyone expects to accommodate everyone else without getting anything in return." Another long pause. "That seems reasonable." "It is reasonable. It's been reasonable for 32 years. I just finally worked up the courage to ask for it." We talked for another 20 minutes, carefully and thoughtfully, laying groundwork for a different kind of relationship. It wasn't easy. Decades of family dynamics don't change overnight, but it was a beginning. Claire called a few days later, less formal than Dad, but more defensive. "I still think you overreacted," she said. "But Mom says I need to understand your perspective." "Do you want to understand my perspective? Or did Mom just tell you to call me?" "Both, I guess." So I told her. I told her about the princess cake and the ignored achievements and the constant feeling that everyone else in the family mattered more than I did. I told her about growing up believing that my needs were inherently less important than hers and Marcus's, about learning to make myself small and undemanding because that seemed to be what everyone wanted from me. She was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. "I honestly never noticed," she said finally. "I mean, I knew you were quiet, but I thought that was just your personality." It became my personality because it was the only way to survive in our family. But it wasn't who I really was. Who are you really? It was a good question, and one I was still figuring out the answer to. I'm someone who has opinions and feelings and needs, just like you do. I'm someone who deserves to be heard and seen and valued. I'm someone who's tired of apologizing for existing. I never asked you to apologize for existing. You didn't have to ask. The message came through loud and clear every time my accomplishments were dismissed or my preferences were ignored or my presence was treated as optional. We talked for over an hour, working through years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding. It wasn't a complete resolution that would take time, but it was progress. Marcus was the last to reach out, which didn't surprise me. He had always been the most conflict-averse member of our family, the one who preferred to wait for storms to pass rather than weather them directly. "Hey," he said when I answered his call. "I owe you an apology." "For what specifically?" "For sitting there and saying nothing when they told the waiter to ignore you." for not standing up for you, for being okay with how they treated you because it meant more attention for me. It was the most honest thing any of them had said to me, and the closest thing to a real apology I'd received. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I want to do better," he said. "I want us to have a real relationship, not just the fake family stuff we do at holidays." "I'd like that too." We made plans to meet for lunch the next time he was in my city for business. Just the two of us. No family dynamics or old patterns to navigate. A chance to get to know each other as adults rather than as the roles we'd been assigned in childhood. 6 months after the dinner at Romano's, we had another family gathering. This time, it was for Claire's engagement, and this time I almost didn't go. But I decided to give them and myself a chance to prove that things could be different. The restaurant was different too. A casual place where we all ordered our own food without anyone needing to instruct the server about anyone else's needs. I ordered what I wanted, participated in conversations, shared stories about my life that people actually listened to. When Claire made a toast about love and family, she included me in her thanks, acknowledging my support and presence in her life in ways she never had before. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I felt the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. Still times when I had to speak up for myself or redirect conversations that were sliding toward familiar territory. But it was better. Measurably, significantly better. After dinner, as we were walking to our cars, Mom linked her arm through mine. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For teaching us how to be better, for not giving up on us even when we didn't deserve your patience." I thought about that little boy with the princess cake, about the teenager whose achievements went uncelebrated, about the adult who had spent decades making himself invisible to keep the peace. I thought about the moment in Romano's when I finally found my voice, when I finally decided I was worth fighting for. "I didn't do it for you," I said, not unkindly. "I did it for me." She nodded. "I know. That's why I'm proud of you." That night, back in my hotel room, I called my therapist. We had been working together for months now, unpacking years of conditioning and building new patterns of thinking about my own worth. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better," I said. "Not perfect, but better. I think they're starting to understand." "And how do you feel?" I considered the question. How did I feel? Not like the invisible middle child I'd been for so long. Not like the accommodating family member who absorbed everyone else's needs while ignoring his own. Not like someone who had to apologize for existing or fight for basic recognition. "I feel like myself," I said finally. "For the first time in my life, I feel like myself." It's been 2 years now since that night at Romano's. 2 years since I learned that family love shouldn't require you to make yourself invisible. 2 years since I discovered that demanding respect isn't selfish, it's necessary. My relationships with my family members are different now. Not easier, necessarily, but healthier. More honest. Built on mutual respect rather than old patterns of accommodation and assumption. We still have work to do, all of us, but we're doing it. I think about James sometimes, the waiter who got caught in the middle of my family's dysfunction. I wonder if he remembers the night when a family asked him to ignore one of their own members, if he tells the story to other servers as an example of the strange things people do to each other. I hope he understands that his confusion and discomfort in that moment helped me see my situation clearly for the first time. Sometimes people ask me if I regret confronting my family so publicly, if I wish I had handled it differently. The answer is no. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to raise your voice. Sometimes the only way to be seen is to refuse to be invisible. Sometimes the only way to be valued is to insist on your own worth, even when the people who are supposed to love you most have forgotten how to do it. I am 34 now, and I know who I am. I am someone who deserves to order his own dinner, to have his achievements celebrated, to be heard when he speaks. I am someone who matters, not because of what I do for other people, but because of who I am. I am visible. I am valued. I am worth the space I take up in the world. And I will never let anyone tell a waiter to ignore me again.